Its author is a very interesting economist, the economist of economists, Thomas Schelling. Who is Thomas Schelling? The smartest economists. Years ago, when Thomas Schelling was retiring from Harvard, a university rushed to poach him. The university is more rigid. Even those who dig themselves have to submit 4 letters of recommendation. This was not a problem for Schelling. All 4 of his recommendation letters were written by Nobel Prize winners. Among them, Samuelson, the most well-known economist of the 20th century, wrote, "Schelling is the smartest economist I've ever met." My friend Zixie relayed the anecdote on Weibo after hearing it from the university's former dean. There was a reason the university poached a guy who was about to retire. They were betting that Schelling would win the Nobel Prize. Sure enough, Schelling won the Nobel Prize in economics not long after. The smartest economist in Samuelson's eyes is naturally an economist among economists, but Schelling is also an atypical economist. He is a big game theorist, and his writings are mostly collected essays. Game theory is almost math, but his papers don't have much math. It may be because his mastery of language has become so advanced that words are enough to express subtle logic that is usually thought to be impossible to express without models. It may also be because his academic interest lies in predicting and explaining real-world human behavior. Most of Schelling's knowledge was done at the RAND Corporation, the most famous think tank in the US, which directly served the strategic design of the US during the Cold War. The United States and the Soviet Union were unbroken in the Cold War for decades, and they had to walk to the edge of the cliff and back from time to time. We may never know how much of a role Schelling played, only that his role was so significant that when he won the Nobel Prize, the award speech was written like this, in the context of the nuclear military race. The analysis of game theory has deepened people's understanding of conflict and cooperation. It is like Zilin to do knowledge and achieve the use of economy and economy. After introducing Schelling, I'm going to tell you about his major contribution to containing the war between the United States and the Soviet Union during the Cold War, which is an important concept proposed in game theory. Focus point, also known as Schelling point. Out-of-touch dating. If you are in the south of the sky and your friends are in the north, tomorrow is New Year's Day, and you have made an appointment to meet in Beijing tomorrow, but you don't know what time tomorrow. You didn't say where in Beijing, and you can't contact each other. Neither of you are in Beijing. People you don't know, etc. In short, you only know, and he only knows, that the 2 of you are going to meet in Beijing, and nothing else. Excuse me, can you meet above tomorrow? What time and where? That problem is not so insoluble as it seems. You know, it doesn't make sense to just guess where you want to meet. It makes sense to guess where the other person wants to meet, and the other person does the same. So you're guessing him, he's guessing you. On the surface, it's an infinite loop, like 2 mirrors reflecting each other without stopping. In reality, it might stop. If customs, laws, traditions, education, hobbies, and your shared experiences make a certain point in time have a special meaning for the 2 of you, or if one place seems more reasonable than all other places, then that place is your focal point in the event. That is where you may choose to meet. I guess the place where you and your friends meet is Tiananmen Square, and the time is when the national flag is raised. Why? Because tomorrow is New Year's Day. Tiananmen Square is the most famous place in Beijing, and it is a place that is easier to think of than any other place. And on New Year's Day, the most prominent time point for Tiananmen Square is the time when the flag is raised. You go check the weather forecast now. What time is the sunrise tomorrow? Raise the flag at sunrise. Miss this time, miss this place, it will be difficult for you to see him. The same story was told by Sharon. At a different time and place, the final meeting time was 12 noon at Grand Central Station in New York. In this game, Schelling said, that particular time, that particular place, is the focal point. Each person expects the other person to expect what he expects the other person to expect. So the focus is how each person expects the other person to expect what he might do. Markets and the Cold War. It sounds like a romantic story, but it's actually very practical. For example, beauty pageants, ring fat and swallow thin, let you predict who will win the oasis. Who is the most beautiful where there is an objective standard? How to predict. The most reliable was to predict that the person with obvious characteristics would win the championship, even if that characteristic was just a mole. This had nothing to do with whether the mole had entered the epidemic. As long as it could separate yin-yang and yang-yang from each other, it would become the focus of attention. In the psychological gaze of the judges, you see me, I see you, the winner stood out. This is why, in a world where influencer faces are more popular, there is no reason to prefer them. When it comes to beauty pageants, it is impossible not to think about investment. Keynes, the wise man, economist, thinker and investor, he managed the property investment of King's College, Cambridge. Buying stocks, he said, is like a beauty pageant. You want to buy stocks that will go up, and you're no different from you predicting who will win a beauty pageant. You have to guess what other people think is beautiful and expensive, and other people are not guessing. You. Guess me, in this game where everyone wants everyone else to make the same choice as themselves. If the focus appears, the market will instantly join forces. Veteran investors often say that the market is what it is, it just needs a reason. The focus is the reason the market waits. Pushing it aside, it is not difficult to understand why the effect of policies in the Chinese market is so significant. Because policy is the focus of the market. The market itself has countless potential possibilities, but the market knows that the government's policy is the most powerful existence. So when the government issues a policy, these infinite possibilities will instantly converge to the policy dimension. So don't easily say that the market is irrational. The market is likely to be very rational. We just talked about beauty pageants, marketing, investing, and how to date people and blind appointments. All three cases have something in common, which is where there is an obvious focus. We can still find the mechanism for everyone to choose and coordinate. When there is no information communication or insufficient information communication, or when you can't trust each other's information, which is the most obvious point that stops the endless cycle and recursion. And this point is not only useful for the things just mentioned, it is also related to the life and death of human beings. The most serious of Schelling's research topics was the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union. The Cold War lasted for 40 years, and the biggest achievement was that it did not change from cold to hot. Second, both the United States and the Soviet Union had extremely large nuclear arsenals, but they had never used them even once. In fact, after the nuclear bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki ended World War II, the US Department of Defense assessed its consequences. The first conclusion was that it was amazing, and the second conclusion was that it was a weapon as viable as conventional weapons. Kissinger wrote an important paper in his early years, arguing that the use of nuclear weapons on the battlefield was conceivable and feasible. It was later that the use of nuclear weapons became taboo. Making it taboo is an obvious focus, Schelling said. Imagine a scenario where the use of nuclear weapons is not a taboo in itself, and the United States and the Soviet Union find another focus elsewhere. Can it be found? The yield of nuclear weapons varies greatly. The smallest suitcase nuclear bomb has a yield no greater than that of large conventional weapons. Historically, this point could not be found between the United States and the Soviet Union. Therefore, in the secret war between the United States and the Soviet Union, do you think it is easier to reach a tacit agreement not to use nuclear weapons above a certain level, or not to use nuclear weapons at all? The United States and the Soviet Union are not willing to have a nuclear war, that's for sure. How to avoid such a thing from happening? It is necessary to find the switch not to use nuclear weapons under any circumstances. In fact, they did not sign any agreement, but it was an invisible, tacit understanding, because they found a focal point here. Even if the two sides had a hotline to communicate at any time, if Reagan received an urgent call from Bonezrev from the Kremlin, saying that the ICBM flying towards the US mainland was a misfire, would Reagan believe it or not? In any case, the situation that the ICBM should not fly to the other party is the common focus of the two sides. Whether dealing with friends or opponents, find the focus first and get twice the result with half the effort. I have read all 4 of Schelling's books: The Strategy of Conflict, Arms and Influence, Choice and Consequence, and Micro Motives and Macro Behavior. Each book is worth reading, with topics ranging from self-management, nuclear deterrence, game theory, to terrorism and apartheid, all encompassing and consistent. Summary of this lecture. To conclude, today we talked about a very interesting economist named Schelling and the focus he proposed. The Chinese believe that the top wisdom is called analyzing wonderful truth in Haiming, which means dissecting subtle truth in the smallest place. Schelling deserves this sentence. Of the 4 books I just mentioned today, I especially recommend the last one, Schelling's Micro Motivation and Macro Behavior. And I suggest you also read it and experience the free flow of ideas between the subtle and the vast poles. Thinking today. Today I will give you a question to think about. Why on the road, if there is a person looking up at a certain place? Slowly we'll gather a lot of people looking up at a certain place, even if that place may have nothing. This looks silly, but it actually makes sense. You are welcome to leave a message in the comment area below the document. And you are also welcome to share today's content with friends and discuss it together.